We are live. Welcome everybody to a presentation that we did at the Childcare Early Learning Leaders Summit last Tuesday. And we're doing a live rerun today, which is sort of talking through the future of sort of AI in ECE. Thanks so much for joining. Just before we kick off, we'll start with a quick acknowledgement of country. So we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we work and live on, honouring their elders past, present and emerging. We respect the deep connections Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have with country and commit to learning from their wisdom to build our shared future. So welcome everyone. My name's Hayden, that's me. This is also me, this in the same attire, which was planned. And this is, I guess, the presentation that we did at the Childcare Early Learning Leaders Summit. And really keen to kind of bring this to you and share this knowledge and get your feedback. So we'll be going through that today. Just a quick note on some housekeeping we, I guess, bring these sessions to create and share knowledge and bring positivity to the sector. So please, if you can keep the chat positive, and please feel free to drop any questions. Drop us a note where you're joining from today. We always love to see where people are dialing in from. These sessions will be recorded as well, so they're on demand afterwards. If you miss anything or have to leave early, totally okay. And we'll be doing a couple of polls throughout the session as well. Just helps us get a sense of what's important to you. So good to keep these interactive, and then we'll have some questions at the end. Brilliant. So how to win in the age of AI in ECEC. We know that, right now it's sort of harder than ever. The increasing cost of living pressures, public scrutiny on the sector, increasing compliance pressures, and now more than ever, it's important that services are really able to provide and demonstrate the value of early learning to society. And I guess that narrative, in times like these, that the cream will rise to the top. Luckily, however, we know that the early years are the most important, and we have a real opportunity to help flip the societal narrative on this. If you were to give a parent $1 million to invest in their child's education across their life, they'd probably put it into a posh secondary school or university education. But the research shows us that the first 1,000 days are the most important. And this will only become more important in an AI era where, our children are going into a world where routine jobs, are getting automated. Data entry, accounting, AIs can already perform a lot of these tasks that can be repetitive. The most important thing is the human skills, creativity, problem solving, resilience. And early childhood really leads the way here in terms of cultivating those dispositions for learning that really help shape the trajectory of people's lives. So, I think we have a massive opportunity to play in terms of the education sector and really leading the way ahead of primary and secondary on this. So in order to kind of capture this opportunity, we need to go back to the first principles around innovation and strategy and think more with a long-term view of what sustainably will win in these environments. Often, right now, it's quite easy to fall into sort of knee-jerk or band-aid sort of solutions for some of these challenges. But, we really need to look at the context we're operating in and go back to first principles. So if we look at kind of the models that we operate in early learning in Australia, it sort of sits between two sides of the spectrum. So, on the one side, we operate in this sort of restaurant sort of service model where, if there's lots of restaurants popping up on the street, shiny new shops, the thing that differentiates them is the quality of the food. And in our sector, that is education, the quality of education that children receive. And those services that will win will find ways to differentiate their service on highlighting the value of early learning and the quality they provide. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the utility model, which is more like Canada's model, sort of universal childcare, $10 a day childcare, where, the regulator here enforces quality and pricing differences are capped due to the subsidies, meaning that those that win in that environment are those that can be most cost efficient and can be most compliant. There's not so much sort of differentiations around how do they, be more efficient than other services to exist and operate in those settings that the regulator is enforcing. So, in Australian context, we sort of operate in the middle of that. We have, some government support, but we also have that kind of need to differentiate amongst competition as well. So with these two sort of frames in mind, let's have a look at kind of, I guess, where we think the biggest opportunities for AI might exist helping with this first principles thinking. So on the first side, on sort of differentiation and quality, one of the current big challenges that we're seeing right now across the sector is the shortage of skilled staff. There's high levels of attrition, the new sort of staff coming in, there's often a fast tracking of degrees, and we have a strong reliance on international workers that are still adjusting to Australian context. And by the same token, we have higher participation rates, which means children, are coming to us with more diverse needs, and our educators are struggling to kind of really keep up and being able to demonstrate that quality of education. In terms of the future, with AI, there's a concept called fine-tuning, which, we really believe has a huge potential to democratize knowledge at scale by putting an expert coach in people's pockets. Let me sort of explain this analogy a little bit more simply. So with sort of large language models, they're really based on probability. So, if I say to the audience here, oh, I'm really hungry today, I'm going to go to the shops and eat some fish, and you'll probably say I'll say chips, because your brain has been trained on that data, has seen those sequence of words play out before, that you're able to predict that word. Now, this is similar, when you look at sort of ChatGPT as an example. If you were to ask it a question like, where should I go on my Rome holiday? It will scrape the whole wide web and give you the most probable kind of answer. I'll probably tell you the Colosseum is the place to start, right? This is great for things like holidays or general tasks, but it's not great for specific disciplines. So if I was to ask ChatGPT, how do I perform open heart surgery? I probably wouldn't trust the signal, right? But if we fine tune the engine, if we train it on the leading research in open heart surgery, on videos of the best open heart surgeons performing tasks, then we ask it that question, that signal will be a lot clearer, and you might trust it a little bit more. Not to say you might trust it fully, but that concept of bringing that expert knowledge to that pocket. And we've done the same thing in early childhood, where we've trained, we call our coach Sue, but it's almost like having a mini ed leader in your pocket, trained on sort of the NQF, on your frameworks, on your philosophy, but we can also train it to your internal knowledge system. So, for example, your policies, curriculum guides that you have, it can kind of look up that information and return that to educators and make suggestions based on patterns that it's seeing. So this is really trying to help kind of democratize knowledge and having it more accessible to every individual. And it can also do this in over 40 languages. Large language model translation is really incredible. This, we have a very diverse workforce as well. And so this has a real potential to improve accessibility as well, and really upskill our staff and lift the curve on the skills. There's no silver bullet in anything, but just that ability to really lift the curve is something that we see as a big opportunity. The second thing on the differentiation side is communicating the value of early learning to families. Right now, often in society, there is a bit of a stigma around early learning just being babysitting, and we have an opportunity to flip that. Right now, a lot of what we see is sort of current tech platforms are built more like private Facebooks, where we've often fallen into sort of insta teaching, where we see kind of these floods of photos going out to families. Sometimes people call them proof of life photos, which, take children out of the moment, and not to mention, in terms of respecting the rights of the child from a photo consent perspective, children have the right to have their data forgotten as well. And so there's some, things around that. The groups are exploring sort of, safe pedagogical photography. But, right now across the sector, largely the majority of these platforms are really oriented on that sort of focus. And, I know a photo can tell 1,000 words, but 1,000 photos with no words doesn't say much. And it can sort of reinforce that perception of babysitting if the value of the learning that's occurring isn't clearly communicated. The other thing is, in terms of differentiation, between services, this is very easy to copy. Any service or any person can take photos of a child. But what's really hard is creating deep, personalized learning observations for that parent, for their specific child, that really shows them that you understand their child. That's hard to copy. And when it comes to differentiating, I guess that's the future we're trying to play into. How do we help create more personalized, in-depth learning and help parents really see that value of early learning? Now, in terms of the future of this and the world of AI, we see lots of opportunity here. In the era of AI, data is a real moat. We know already that there's lots of parents that use ChatGPT to ask for advice on their child. We know that. But it's not kind of ChatGPT, you have to really work hard to provide it lots of data on your child to make those suggestions more accurate. It's also not sort of fine-tuned to, like we talked about before, to kind of best practice on leading parent research, et cetera, and child development research. But in early learning, we have such a great, host of data. Teachers are observing children, writing notes, and if we can build, having a interface with parents that allows them to have a fine-tuned coach to access that data, be able to ask sort of questions, and if we can fine-tune it to the latest neuroscience research, child development, parent, leading parent sort of advice, we can provide sort of a little mini expert parent coach for parents to sort of tap into. And that's not to say that we want to see this future where parents are just talking to a little AI coach instead of talking to the educators in the service. That's not what we're saying here, but just being able to provide new avenues to explore information, because once they just are exposed to more information, it can prompt a conversation in person at the service on something, parents saying, hey, I saw this, around the first 1,000 days being most important. How does that work? Can you tell me about that in your service? And so for us, it's about how do we raise the intelligence across society of everyone understanding the importance of the early years that we see, a big opportunity for. The other thing as well is that with all this data that the service is kind of learning, is gathering on the child and their interests, we can use sort of AI to help suggest and extend on that learning at home. It can kind of look at, the child seems to be interested in this. Here's some suggestions for the parents on how they can extend that at home. And we can do really cool things like, parents could take a photo of their living environment, whether they're in a flat or whether they have a backyard, and the AI can actually take that information in and recommend activities that are relevant to their context. And so really what we can sort of move towards in this future is creating more of a two-player journey when it comes to parent engagement. And have them sort of actively collaborating with the service, versus right now it's more of sort of a one-way, pushing out content and sort of likes and comments. You do get some comments back, but how do we create some infrastructure that really helps create that two-way partnership and rich dialogue around in-depth learning that children are having at the service? So let's now flip to the other side of the model, the utility sort of model, where sort of cost and efficiency becomes more important. The other thing that we see is, currently across the sector, educators just sort of buried in paperwork, and, operators often paying for additional non-contact time beyond the 2-hour minimum so they can fit that all in, or if they're not paying for that time, we do see educators often working after hours, and there's an increasing risk there with the regulations on psychosocial risk at work and, the liability that occurs with that. And not to mention, documentation loads is one of the biggest drivers of attrition in our sector. So in the future state, we really see this potential that, we don't believe educators need to be Shakespeares when it comes to writing documents, but they do need to be critical thinkers and spend quality time with children. We know already that educators are using AI tools to save time. But these are generic tools and there's no safeguards on critical thinking. If you put something into ChatGPT, a single line on write me a learning story about Timmy, it can hallucinate something that may or may not have happened. And, often we have this term of AI slop, and that going out to families and that, having a de-skilling risk. Not to mention that some of these tools as well sort of breach online safety standards for Australia, because the data is trained, they train their data on customer data, and that data is held offshore. So lots of sort of, challenges with these generic tools. But here, the real thing is, this isn't an AI problem. this is a product problem, because let me give you an example with this. Last year, so MIT ran a study on sort of ChatGPT and the de-skilling risk for secondary school students. They had groups writing essays and had a control group that used ChatGPT, control group, then a group that used ChatGPT, and a group that sort of just used a Google search engine. And they found that those students that did use ChatGPT had lower recall on what they actually wrote, and there was a significant de-skilling risk there. But OpenAI from there actually built a specific tool, and they hired a team of pedagogists and leading teachers to build out something called OpenAI's study mode. What this did was that in its sort of chats with students, it used scaffolded coaching and also had checks and balances, like did they actually understand this content before they were able to progress and get sort of further answers. They did that in collaboration with University of Tartu, and they ran a randomized controlled trial. It hasn't yet been published, but the early results that have been released online show a significant improvement in those students' results and to their learning recall. So again, this shows that when everyone, often they just sort of write off AI in general, but it's not about that. Spell check in Word is AI. So it's about the products and how they're using this technology to safely and thoughtfully leverage it. And one of the big things, that we see on our side as well is from that kind of reducing paperwork side is obviously making sure we have upskilling is we have built our own AIs within our product, as an example, where if there isn't enough critical thinking, it detects that and then pushes the educator into a coaching conversation. It doesn't let them generate the document and just sort of create this sort of hallucinated slop. So that's how we sort of maintain that making sure we're getting that coaching and they've done enough critical thinking before they can generate and get those speed benefits. One of the other things, in terms of the product design is this future that we see on leading with kind of a voice native approach. AI, like I said, is very good at translation in over 40 languages, talking to it and being able to, educators aren't sort of people that, have their careers sitting behind a desk typing, creating a lot of documents. They're often good talkers. We do like talking in the services. So, how can we create this faster, more voice native approach so that we can spend more quality time with children? And really that being the end goal. The second thing that we often see on the kind of efficiency side is, with AI, I think we really need to be clear on what is the low value work that humans are doing that we can automate so that we can maximize the high value human work. And right now we see this challenge with a lot of leaders, in our services who are in the most highly leveraged leadership positions, spending hours on low value admin work. We see ed leaders and center managers reviewing documents, going through compliance checklists, versus spending time on the high value human work with their teams, being in ratio, sort of focusing on that peer-to-peer mentoring. Not to mention some of the costs that has to the business, having to have additional staff cover those things, but just really the kind of team and cultural assets that they can kind of provide. The other thing is we see a lot of area managers or ops managers, curriculum leaders, and you're sort of manually going through Excel sheets to do audits, and that kind of, the dread of the A&R door knock. If you hear services get an A&R door knock, they're sort of gone for the week. You don't hear anything from them. It's sort of quite a reactive process at the moment, and there's not much visibility across services and where they're at. And we think there's a big opportunity here in terms of the future state with AI in firstly sort of automating that sort of low value human work. We can have AI agents that are very good at looking at an audit, criteria and running that sort of audit as well. And then creating analytics that allows leaders to then have great visibility to proactively monitor quality in real time. Imagine a world where you get the A&R door knock and you've already been proactively monitoring everything at your service. Oh, sweet, they're going to be okay. And I guess reducing some of this chaos with some of the paperwork and admin side that we have in our services at the moment. And I think the other thing is from that, if we can alleviate that work for our leaders, we can have them in more high leverage human roles, really kind of being with their team, peer-to-peer mentoring as well inside the services. Now, there is a lot of noise in this AI space. So it sort of begs a question on how do we evaluate AI platforms to help differentiate and, on that value side, and also optimize our operating model. Now, the first thing to note is that not all AI is the same. There's often this quite a big divide between two categories that are emerging in the AI space, where we have sort of legacy systems that are bolting AI on top. So they can do things like fix spelling and grammar, can do some rewordings of different documents, and can translate those documents. But it's really based on sort of existing workflows. And so with that bolt-in on top, there is some benefit, but it's very different to the benefit of having AI native systems, which is sort of what I've got on the right there, which is where intelligence is really at the core of these platforms and the design of those. And we can really reimagine workflows to create net new benefits that we never really thought about before. Now, to let me kind of explain this a bit more, because there's a bit of a jargony concept, I want to run you through kind of, I guess, 3 levels of sort of AI sort of knowledge and use of AI. And I want to do a little bit of a poll on this to get where people are at. So I'll sort of get that up in a second, but let me explain. So there's sort of three levels to this AI native category. The first is chat. So how many of you have kind of used ChatGPT or Claude and just had a chat with that system? You know that from there, it's an intelligent sort of system. It can learn about your preferences over time, your style of voice. So it's kind of always learning, but it's really that chat interface is, I'd say, the level 1. Level 2 is having sort of single agents coordinate tasks. So some of you may have used Claude Cowork before. It can do things like, you get an agent to look up the new regulation changes and then look at your policy document and suggest corrections to it. We heard of groups doing that sort of stuff already. That would be your level 2. And then level 3 is multi-agent teams. So that's where, as an example, you could have one agent that is looking up your parent feedback that you might have a survey that runs, collating that into themes. It then sends that to a marketing agent who's been trained on creating kind of posters or brand assets. It then spins those insights from the parents into sort of marketing assets that you might have on the service. And then that might pass it on to another agent who's your copywriting agent, who creates, email copy, and you distribute that as like a marketing asset to families. So these agents like coordinating tasks together. In our system, we have over 70 agents sort of baked into the platform that coordinate different tasks. And that's sort of, I guess, what you'd call the level 3. But when I get a sense of where people are at with that, and add this poll to the screen, I'd probably hazard a guess that most people have been at level 1. If there's anyone at level 2, that's really impressive. And level 3, if you've answered that, we'll hire you straight away. So let's see. Yep, chat only. Cool. Anyone in level 2 would be really interesting to hear. Claude Cowork is probably one of the leading tools for that. Oh yeah, we got a couple. Any level 3s? If not, that's I guess the next slide. But awesome. I guess that gives you a sense of like kind of just the realms of where these AI native systems can go. That hopefully gives you a really good sense of that. And I might just leave that poll in the background. Now, but something that's really important as well. So, looking at that difference between legacy systems bolting it on top and AI native design systems, the other thing that's really important in this era is safety of data. Now, when it comes to this, it's really important that you're asking these questions of your technology providers, that they are making sure they have, the international standards for cybersecurity safeguards. So, the things you should ask for is, do they have a SOC 2, ISO 27001 and ISO 42001? We are caretakers of children's data. So it is utmost importance that these systems have the relevant safeguards in place. Now, a lot of people often say, anything with AI is bad for children's data. But again, this isn't an AI problem. This is about the providers and the trust they go to in order to protect this data. So, for example, parents have heaps of photos of their children on their phone, their Apple iPhone, but why do we trust Apple? Because Apple has these safeguards. We trust them with our data. And it's really important that when any data is being put into these sort of platforms, that you are asking these things of your providers. We had released an online child safety report as well. So if that is of interest to anyone, you can message us. I'm really trying to advocate for this across the sector as well. The next thing that's really important to evaluate is in this tech future, it's really important to keep your eye out on sort of those specialist tools, because right now there's a lot of noise around sort of all-in-one platforms, which sound great in theory, but they're a jack of all trades, master of none often. And in order to harness the benefits of these AI native workflows, that you really need to go deep and understand the trade deeply to design tools that really help shift the dial with those things. If it's just an all-in-one, you can't be everywhere at once. And in this sort of future, the future is moving towards specialist tools that have integrated within a software stack. It's very easy to kind of have data move and flow between platforms these days. So having that kind of integrations is where the sort of future is moving. And we're seeing this, with leading providers. So, OpenAI, I have sort of ChatGPT, which is a generic tool for, great for things like emails, but they themselves are building out industry verticals. So like I said, they've hired a team of pedagogists and teachers that built their study mode tool. They hired a bunch of investment bankers to build out an investment banking due diligence specialist platform. And, we're seeing this across other sectors as well. One of Australia's leading health startups, Heidi Health, they're sort of an AI native company as well. And they are built by a team of doctors and techies. So, the future is really kind of going deep in those spaces to realize those benefits. And kind of having those sort of integrations as a key part of it. So that's something to look out to with the sector as well, with where this is going across all industries as well. Well, and then this comes to, I guess, the point, why now? Quite frankly, AI is here to stay, and it's moving really fast. If we look at sort of ChatGPT, it gained 800 million users in 2 years, and it took the internet to get to 800 million users 13 years. So this is lightning speed. Claude, Anthropic, and OpenAI, the models that they're continuously releasing, they've sort of noted that over 90% of their code is written by the AIs themselves that are sort of self-learning, correcting that process. So, and these AI agents, they can work 24/7. They don't have families to go to. Maybe that will happen in the future, let's see. But, these models and AI is really moving fast. This is sort of one of the biggest changes in human history since the Industrial Revolution. But if human history does tell us something, that with any adoption of new innovation, there is always, a bit of a bell curve and distribution of people, and that fall into, 3 broad categories. Those that make things happen, those that watch things happen, and those that say, oh, geez, what happened? So it's really important that we are leaning into these conversations. We're testing these tools, we're critiquing them, we're debating, so we can really safeguard children's futures together and help teachers do the work of their lives, and help, I'm really a big optimist in terms of the potential for this technology to help teachers do more of the work they came into the profession to do, spend quality time with children, and elevate the status of educators as the essential professionals that they are in society, and we can make the early years really lead the way. So, that's I guess the opportunity that we see. And if you'd ever like to get a sense of the efficiency uplift, we have built an economics benefits and readiness calculator. We've tested that with a few of the large providers that we work with, and also a PE outfit to test some of the logic of these models. This kind of helps to quantify some of the benefits from an AI native transformation, and you can put in sort of details of your services to check out what that could look like. And if you have any questions as well, before we kind of tell you what else is coming up on the webinar side, would love to throw to a bit of a Q&A, and also just get your feedback on the webinar. A little poll come up just on, how just some feedback for us. We're always learning and trying to get better, so really appreciate that too. But I'll just check in on the questions. Awesome. Okay, thanks Amal for jumping in for Joe on what an agent is. Hopefully people have seen that in the chat. essentially, just to give a little bit of an overview of that as well. So like I said, large language models work on kind of probability. So if you ask it a question, it kind of does what it's most probable. Now that's when you're kind of interacting with it. Now when you combine that with systems, and we call this like a non-deterministic system because it's based on probability. So if you ask it the same question 100 times, it might give you different answers, slightly different answers. But when you combine that technology with deterministic technology, like the current, platforms that we often work in, so being able to navigate a website and buy some groceries, right? That's a deterministic system. There's clicks and you go through that system. What you can do is use AI, which is non-deterministic, as an agent, and it can then look at and move through that system because there's not really too much variation in the probability of the path. It knows that, okay, if I give it a task to go and buy me some bananas, it can see what image looks like a banana. It can see what's looked like the buy now, add to cart, and it can select that for you. It's like in working, a non-deterministic agent can work within a deterministic system. So that's kind of how agents work, if that sort of makes sense. You can get it to do tasks on behalf of you. Any other questions? That's a great question, Joe. Awesome. Anything else? Otherwise, love to show you, I guess, what's coming up webinar-wise. We've got some awesome new ones. We have Sandy Phoenix, who is such a great thought leader in terms of leadership and child safety as well. She'll really go deep into how to create a child-safe culture within your service and building on that kind of high-value human work that we're really big advocates for. So you can suss that one out as well. She's going to be awesome. And the last one is Maggie Dent, an OG in the sector. So you can click on that one, and she's going to talk about all that knowledge she's got in her head and who they're becoming, why the early years window changes everything. So, this is part of our mission to really elevate the narrative around the early years. So, if you do have any suggestions on future webinars, or if you've got something you'd love to say, please drop us a note. We're really keen to get your feedback on these ones and really grateful for your time. So, thank you so much, everyone. Oh, hang on, there's more questions. I missed it. All right. What are the risks of relying too much on AI? Okay, I'm going to go back to the Q&A side. Thank you, Marianne. Joe, I've done the agent one. That's awesome. In terms of the risk of relying on too much AI, again, coming back to that point of this isn't an AI problem, this is a product problem. So how do we design AI with intention? I think there's a risk of AI, of de-skilling, like I spoke about, Marianne, where if we don't have safeguards to make sure, it's a term called, in the research, called metacognition. AI tools, the generic ones, for example, can be used effectively if people are aware of the thinking of their thinking. That's what this term metacognition is. So if I know where I need to get towards an outcome, I can kind of use AI to bounce off as an assistant, but because I kind of have an awareness of whether I'm thinking critically enough to actually validate this essay that I'm writing, right? But that skill, metacognition, is quite a high order skill. And there's a risk if there's no safeguards where people just go, oh, cool, AI is right, I'm going to use that. We need to build in safeguards into our platforms so that it's detecting whether there's been enough critical thinking before you start to get this assistance. Otherwise, we can push it into that coaching and getting them to think and cultivate more of that metacognition. So that's, I guess, the risk that we've tried to do, but other tools are also doing to help use product more effectively to do that. It's not to say you can give. There might be some educators that you can give them all the best fancy tools in the world, but they don't want to buy into it because maybe that's not their passion, or they're just not on that journey. Like people are on this journey, and like I said, there's those that make things happen, those that watch things happen, and those that say, "Oh, geez, what happened?" And I think whether we like it or not, we've got to sort of lean into seeing how these things are working. And people might go, "Cool, I don't want to use AI for this thing." That's totally okay, but It shouldn't be, let's not use it because I'm too scared to engage with it or question it. I think, it's already here. So how do we kind of really be intentional with what we think it can help us with and what it can't? So great question, Marianne. Appreciate that. Beautiful. Okay. Well, I'm over time, so I'm sorry about that, everyone. But any questions? I'd love to do some follow-ups and hear what you guys think. If it would really mean a lot to us. So thanks again for coming along, and see you next one. Beauty.